I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. In today's podcast, we are going to be talking about caffeine and the effects of caffeine, the benefits of it, the drawbacks, and some misconceptions about caffeine. And personally, my main source and choice of caffeine tends to be coffee. And I really love a good cup of coffee. It's something that is part of my morning. It's part of the ritual. It's part of how I just really enjoy starting my day, is just sipping that good cup of coffee. Over the years, what I consider a good cup of coffee has also changed, as I'm sure yours may have as well. I grew up with normal brewed coffee, your normal coffee pot coffee. And the more that I've tried different coffees and kind of been exposed to different coffees, now what I really love is the more concentrated, more Italian style, kind of a richer espresso type coffee. On the weekends, I've talked about this a little bit before, but we do a stovetop coffee. It's a little contraption. It is called a mocha, M-O-K-A. And you basically put the grounds in it, and then there's water that boils under it, and it kind of steeps or goes through the grounds and comes into the top where you pour it. And it is just like an old fashioned, you don't need to plug it in. It's just basically you could do it over a campfire. It's just like old school Italian coffee. And that's what I do on the weekends when we have a little bit more time. And then during the week when we're just, need something a little faster, the Nespresso. I know a lot of people love their Keurigs. I haven't found a Keurig coffee that I really love, but the Nespresso is something that if you haven't tried it and you love good coffee, you would love the Nespresso. And it's just little pods that go in there, but it's just that really rich kind of full-bodied coffee. When I go to a coffee shop, it's a little bit of a struggle sometimes, because what I've also, as I was saying, my coffee has changed over the years. I used to do, I think, what a lot of us do, like those big, giant cups of coffee. They would look like a bowl of coffee. Just a huge oversized mug, because I felt like, and it was also when I was doing just kind of regular coffee pot coffee, it was kind of just a lot, this huge amount of coffee that probably it wasn't as strong. And so having what was essentially a fishbowl of coffee, or our to-goes, if it was iced coffee, the 16 ounce, the 24 ounce, any of these. As I've gone to that richer, fuller coffee, though, my cups have actually gotten smaller. In fact, that was something my stepmom was happy this year for my birthday. I actually had something that I wanted to, to ask for. A lot of times, as you get older and they ask what you want for your birthday, you don't really have something specifically. But I had been at my dad's house, and he and my stepmom had these great, just the right size coffee mugs. And they were like these handmade pottery mugs. And I was like, they were smaller. They were smaller than what I had been using at home. And as I've gone to this different coffee over the years, the mugs I had were just too big for it. So anyway, that's why I say it's kind of evolved. I've gone to that richer, fuller coffee. The other thing that's really changed is the smaller cups, but also less of it. So through the years, I would start with, a couple of cups of coffee in the morning. I may have iced coffee or two in the afternoon. And I felt like it wasn't as maybe high quality coffee. It maybe wasn't as full or rich or flavorful. And I was consuming a lot more of it. So as I've kind of gradually shifted, I actually now have one cup, maybe two in the mornings. And it's usually two, let's be honest. But, if I have just one cup and run out of time, I don't feel like I quote, need that second cup, because I think, again, it's stronger, it's richer, and I don't feel like I need quite the volume of it. But it's been really interesting to me. I didn't even make a conscious effort, but I have really cut back how much coffee in the morning, but I don't even crave or look for or want to have that iced coffee in the afternoon, certainly not a second one, or reaching for any type of caffeine in the afternoon. And it's really strange. I never would have thought that. It wasn't something that I made this conscious, I need to cut back on. When I had tried that in the past, it kind of backfired because I was so focused on, I'm really taking in a lot of caffeine. I really feel like I need to cut back a bit. I wasn't so focused on it. It actually just kind of organically happened. And I would realize, the afternoon had come and gone and it was evening, and wow, I hadn't felt that dip, or I hadn't felt like I, quote, needed that iced coffee or whatever. So it was interesting that I think my caffeine consumption has been cut by maybe at least half, if not 75% less. So it's just really shocking. So again, not something that was a conscious effort, but by changing the type of coffee I drink, by, I think, savoring it and having that greater level of appreciation, overall, I've been able to dial back my caffeine intake. So I say all of that to say coffee is very important to me. So side note also, what goes into my coffee has also changed. I've tried things over the years, different types of milk. Back in the 90s, it would be fat-free milk, 2% milk. Now I just use a splash of half and half. I've used things like coconut oil, kind of whisking it or frothing it into the coffee. I don't mind that. I'll do that if I'm out of half and half. But personally, I just love a bit of real half and half. I like to put it in the milk frother. I find that I don't need a sweetener. That's another big thing I would say, is we can really train our taste buds that we don't need, a lot of people may do sugar-free, but you're doing the sugar-free French vanilla creamer, for example. And it's just so sweet. And we're really training our taste buds first thing in the morning to expect and be accustomed to having just this sweet, sweet, sweet flavor. And that makes it harder for us to adapt to cutting back sugar and other parts of our diet. So the more that we can kind of retrain our taste buds and really find ways that we can enjoy the flavor of the things that we're actually consuming without adding such sweetness, even better. So personally, I do this really good, flavorful cup of coffee, not a huge one. It would be, it's maybe 6 ounces, and then a little bit of frothed half and half. If it's cold half and half, that's fine. But if possible, I like it to be frothed and a little bit warm and put in there. So as I'm having a coffee conversation with people, some people are like, well, you're a nutritionist. Like, isn't coffee bad for you? And I think that's a really big misconception that a lot of people have, that if I'm going to be as healthy as possible, I need to cut out coffee. People will kind of say in a guilty way, like, oh, I've made a lot of improvements. I've changed this in my diet. I've changed this, and almost apologetically, but I still have my coffee. That's not a bad thing. We don't need to feel guilty about it. Is tea great? Yes, tea is fantastic. We've done an entire podcast on tea. So I encourage you to listen to that if you do want to learn more about the different types of teas, the different health benefits of the different types. So tea is absolutely fantastic. Coffee also has its place in a really nutritious diet. It is one of the top sources of antioxidants in our diets. It's also it is one of the most widely used. Some researchers will actually refer to coffee, or actually, I guess, caffeine more specifically. Caffeine is one of the most widely used stimulants, with estimated 80 to 90% of us in America, but I would say likely worldwide as well. But 80 to 90% of us consume some sort of caffeine throughout the day. And of course, in the US, that choice of caffeine tends to be coffee, also tea as well. But caffeine, so kind of moving to let's talk about just caffeine in general. So we're not talking just coffee through this podcast. Coffee tends to be my main source of caffeine, but we're going to talk about just caffeine in general. So caffeine, it's a naturally occurring compound. So it exists in nature naturally. It is in the leaves and seeds and fruits of more than 60 different plants. The ones that we're most familiar with, of course, are coffee beans, tea leaves, cacao beans, where we make our chocolate. But caffeine is definitely naturally occurring in a lot of different plants. Caffeine can be isolated. It can be isolated into just its purest form, and it's just kind of a white crystalline powder that tastes really bitter. So you can isolate caffeine. You'll see that some products have caffeine added to it. Sometimes it might be the natural source, say green tea extract. Sometimes it is just this isolated kind of that white crystalline powder that would be pure caffeine added to something. So what does caffeine do? Why do so many of us crave it? Why are companies adding it to foods? You'll now see, there's caffeine in gum. There's caffeine in jerky. If you've seen There's one called turkey jerky or perky jerky, and it's caffeinated jerky. There's mints. There's all types of things there's water that has caffeine in it. I'm not a huge fan of really any of those things because it can be really easy to get too much into our diets. And also when we're looking at kind of the natural benefits that we get through things like the tea leaves, the coffee beans, there's a lot of good antioxidant benefit from there. When we're having just that pure white crystalline caffeine powder added to things, we're not getting it. We're getting just the pure stimulant there. So we'll talk more about those things. But when we talk about, well, what does caffeine do? Why do people crave it? Why is it such a the most prevalent stimulant that we're reaching for? Why are companies adding this to foods, to drinks? So caffeine essentially stimulates our central nervous system. That's no surprise to us. So it stimulates our central nervous system. And most commonly, when we look at the process of what's happening inside of our body, it binds to receptors called adenosine receptors. And adenosine, it's a compound that is involved in a lot of pathways in the body, mostly for energy transfer. Adenosine it's a neuromodulator. It's linked to our sleep. It affects our memory. It affects our learning. It also helps to protect our cells. So when caffeine it binds to or blocks these adenosine receptors, that caffeine is thought to, at that point, that's part of what increases the release of these neurotransmitters like dopamine that give us the physical effects that we feel from caffeine. And fortunately for all of us who do have, our usual habit of coffee or tea or whatever it might be, our daily habit isn't so bad. There's actually a lot of benefits to moderate caffeine consumption. Of course, the key word here is moderate. The most immediately noticeable, of course, I think to all of us is an increased sense of alertness. As I had one person described it, it's when the lights come on for me. That first cup of coffee in the morning, it's like the shades are up, the lights come on. So increased alertness, increased sense of focus, just that sharpness, that mental acuity, that's something that I think most of us have come to experience, we've come to expect with caffeine. One of the big misconceptions about caffeine is that caffeinated drinks like coffee or tea are going to leave you dehydrated. This actually isn't true, at least not when we're consuming caffeine in the normal amount that's found in like standard servings of coffee or tea or even soft drinks. They're my least favorite, of course, regular or diet. But the caffeine itself is a diuretic, which means it makes us pee out more fluid than what we're taking in. So if you were taking that caffeine powder we talked about, yes, that's a diuretic. It is causing us to excrete more fluid. We're not taking any in, it's just a powder. And it would definitely have a diuretic effect. When we're drinking coffee or tea, or like we said, even a soft drink or diet soft drink, the liquid that is associated in that drink is helping to offset and basically balance out those dehydrating effects. So it's either a neutral or a little bit of a net positive. So we used to think that caffeinated drinks didn't, quote, count towards our fluid intake for the day. Now we know that they do. Obviously, for reasons we'll talk about in a bit, we want to limit our caffeine intake through the day. So you wouldn't want this to make up the majority of your fluid intake for the day. But as you're looking at how much fluid am I taking in throughout, you can count your coffee, your tea, anything that is a caffeinated drink. It is not hydrating. So when we are looking at, okay, what are some of the benefits of caffeine, that alertness, that focus, that mental acuity we talked about, the mental alertness it's probably one of the most, it's the most noticeable. It's also one of the most studied benefits of caffeine. There's a lot on it, but basically caffeine of all types, again, whether it's coffee or tea, in studies, it looks like it is helping us to prevent a decline in alertness and cognitive capacity. So our reasoning, our thought processes, our logic, and it's especially effective in people who are not regular caffeine users. So in theory, if you're not a big caffeine user and that's how the researchers talk about it. If you're not a regular consumer or drinker of something of caffeine and you have a big test, you have, let's just say, your boards or some big exam or something like that, having just a little bit, the equivalent of a cup of coffee before some sort of test, aptitude, cognitive performance test, it will help to improve reaction time, logic thinking, especially for those who are not usual drinkers of caffeine. But for everybody, I think we all expect that mental alertness. Age-related cognitive decline. So that means as we get older, the mental sharpness that kind of naturally is lost in a lot of people over time. When we look at this, there's population research from something called the Women's Health Initiative. The Women's Health Initiative, it is a huge study of about 68,000 postmenopausal women. And it found that the caffeine equivalent of just under 2 cups of coffee is daily is associated with about a 26% reduced risk of developing dementia or other type of cognitive impairment. And that was in postmenopausal women. So 26% decreased risk with the equivalent of just under 2 cups of coffee daily. Memory, it's also been shown to help memory. So anywhere between the equivalent of 2 cups of tea to 2 cups of coffee can help to improve our memory and our memory function and skills in people. Athletic performance is another huge one. This is huge. We've had Thomas Morstead. He's our punter for the New Orleans Saints. We've had him on this podcast before, and he spent a lot of time talking about his approach to performance using caffeine as a performance enhancer, both mentally and physically. And there's a lot of science on this. There's a lot of documentation showing the effectiveness of caffeine as a performance enhancer, especially for endurance athletes. Bunch of reasons of why, but mostly caffeine can help to decrease our perceived levels of exertion. So how hard does that workout feel? How physically challenging does that workout or exercise feel? Caffeine can actually help to decrease what we're perceiving as how hard it is. So it's not changing it. It's just decreasing our perceived levels of exertion. And so what that means is the athlete is feeling less tired. They're able to keep going longer and stronger. Caffeine may also help our bodies use fat for energy more effectively during exercise. What this means is that it would delay how quickly it's using up those carbs for energy during exercise. All of this also translates to delaying that onset of fatigue. There's some potential benefit of caffeine with like short bouts of like high intensity exercise. So if you think about like sprints or strength training, part of the theory in this is that because of the stimulant effect that caffeine has on our central nervous system, again, that at this point, that caffeine, it's affecting our central nervous system, it's stimulating our central nervous system, and that caffeine can also help to buffer our perception of pain, as well as buffering our perception of perceived exertion, which again allows us to work harder, stronger, longer. So overall, when we look at caffeine and exercise performance, there does seem to be a benefit to physical endurance, which can translate to more power, more speed, more muscle strength over time. The amount of improvement is going to be hugely variable. It is going to be very individual based on someone's tolerance to caffeine. Some people may not tolerate caffeine well at all. It's also going to be based on their genetic makeup. It would be influenced by the timing of caffeine, how hard they're actually working. You can't just say, I'm going to supplement with some caffeine, do your same workouts and expect that you're going to see improvement. So there's a lot of variables in there of how much caffeine is going to have a benefit. But definitely this has been well studied and well documented that there does seem to be some benefits. So those are some of the things so far, our mental focus, our sharpness, our memory, our athletic performance, but also headaches. I know that a lot of us have experienced the withdrawal headache if we don't get our usual caffeine fix, but taking caffeine can also help to treat a migraine headache. So a lot of times, again, you'll see that in combination with some type of a pain reliever, specifically for migraines, also for tension headaches. But here's where it also starts to get interesting. Caffeine can be beneficial for things like diabetes, gallbladder disease, Parkinson's disease. So with diabetes, it actually seems to be dose dependent, meaning the more someone has, the greater of an effect and prevention of type 2 diabetes it has. And so specifically type 2 diabetes, it's really been studied the most for this. And when we look at, for an example, like an increase of 200 milligrams of caffeine a day, which is the equivalent of 2 cups of coffee, has been associated with a 14% drop in the incidence of type 2 diabetes. And this has been studied in a lot of different populations around the world. So consistently, it looks like consuming about 400 milligrams a day from coffee or tea, which is, again, the upper limit of kind of caffeine recommendation. But it's been shown to be anywhere from about 20% to about 30% lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes. I also want to note that it seems to be linked to decreasing the risk of developing type 2 diabetes, but caffeine doesn't seem to be effective in treating it. So that is something to be aware of. But coffee drinkers and tea drinkers overall have a lower incidence of the onset of type 2 diabetes. Gallbladder issues. So drinking caffeine that is like 400 milligrams or more, which again is about 4 cups of coffee, that is associated with a significantly reduced risk of developing gallstones and Parkinson's. There's also been some large-scale studies that suggest people who consume caffeinated beverages on a regular basis also have a decreased risk of Parkinson's disease. So there's the full scope of benefits from, again, athletic performance, mental alertness, sharpness, focus, decreased perception of pain, of physical exertion, of migraine headache, tension headache, diabetes, gallbladder, Parkinson's. There's a lot of benefit that has been studied on caffeine. So again, if you are a regular coffee drinker and you've been feeling guilty about it, here's some of the reasons why you shouldn't. And if you're a big tea drinker, you're also going to be getting a lot of these benefits. As we've talked about before with tea, true tea is green tea, black tea, white tea, oolong tea. If you're drinking herbal tea, you're getting the hydration benefits, but herbal tea is not from the true tea leaf and won't have these benefits that we're talking about as we're talking about caffeine. So that's kind of like a summary of all the benefits. I'd like to take a minute to share a bit about Nutrafol, sponsor for this week's podcast. Nutrafol is designed to support the growth of thicker, fuller, healthier hair from the inside out. My dermatologist, I love this. She not only recommends Nutrafol to her patients, she also uses it herself, which makes me feel really good about it. Nutrafol is a physician-formulated nutritional supplement that's made with potent botanicals, so you can grow thicker, stronger hair and support our show by going to Nutrafol.com and using promo code FUELED to get 20% off. This is their best offer available anywhere, plus free shipping on every order. So 20% off at Nutrafol.com, promo code FUELED. Again, their best offer anywhere, 20% off at Nutrafol.com. It's spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code FUELED for hair as strong as you are. It is not all so glowingly positive, though. As I mentioned kind of in the beginning, the first thing that we've got to, the key word here with all of this is moderation. And so when we look at what is too much caffeine, well, I'll talk about a little bit more detail in just a bit. But so while we know that, okay, this caffeine in these moderate doses, it's typically well tolerated by most people. We'll talk about those in a second who don't tolerate it well. And for most, healthy people, there are these potential benefits of caffeine, whether it's coffee or tea. But we do also know that drinking too much caffeine and drinking either too much on a regular basis, or even just too much in one shot, it can leave us feeling restless, irritable. It can interfere with our sleep. We know that we can become dependent on it to where we have those splitting headaches or we feel really foggy if we don't usually get our caffeine fix. So we need to be mindful again of just how much we're consuming. And some things to just be aware of too, high blood pressure, anxiety, IBS, bipolar disorder, bone health. We'll talk about these coming up of maybe some things just to be mindful of with caffeine. So when it comes to blood pressure, caffeine doesn't seem to have a long-term impact on blood pressure. So if you are, if you've been a caffeine drinker for years, it's not like you're going to, as what we as far as what we're aware of now, you're not going to bring on or bring about or kick off hypertension in yourself just because you've been a coffee drinker. So I want to be clear that caffeine doesn't seem to have that long-term impact on high blood pressure, but it can cause a brief increase in blood pressure, raising both our systolic and diastolic pressure by about 3 points to 15 points. So some people are going to be sensitive to it, and it will cause that spike in their blood pressure. So if you are mindful of your blood pressure anyway, or if you feel like, gosh, I'm kind of, I don't feel quite right after I have it, you can just do your own self-experiment. So you can find out how caffeine affects your own pressure. So check your blood pressure before you consume your caffeine, whether it's coffee, tea, whatever, and then check it again 30 minutes after, and you'll see the difference. How much, if any, difference is that caffeine making? And then you can make that choice. Okay, well, it didn't really affect it much, or it affected it super slightly, or I don't really have I have low blood pressure to begin with. So yeah, it raised it a little bit, but it's still really low. Or no, you know what? This really kicked it up, and I was kind of on the borderline anyway, and it's probably not something I need to do. So I do think kind of educating ourselves when hypertension, blood pressure is an issue, educating ourselves on how we're responding to caffeine is huge. So I would do that little self-experiment. The other thing just to be mindful of is caffeine can exacerbate anxiety disorders. So if you're already struggling with feeling anxious, with feeling stressed, you're feeling kind of like spread too thin, you kind of are like, feel like you're having a hard time like keeping it all together, especially that anxiety. If you, whether it's a diagnosed anxiety disorder, or you feel like you're just kind of like right there on the threshold, especially with everything that we've been having going on with, there's just so much. So if that's the case, then I would definitely recommend keeping that caffeine in check. A lot of times you might not be sleeping well at night because you're having things that you're feeling really anxious about, nervous about. And if you're not sleeping well at night, you might tend to turn to more caffeine through the day. Kind of because, gosh, I felt like, you feel like you need it because you really didn't get that good night's sleep. So you're looking for that caffeine to kind of get you through the day. Then we're absolutely setting ourselves up on that roller coaster. So 100%, if you're feeling that anxiety is any type of an issue, I would be especially mindful of your caffeine intake. Bipolar disorder, drinking caffeine, especially consuming too much caffeine, can exacerbate bipolar disorder. And things like irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, caffeine can worsen symptoms of that as well. And bone health. This is something that I do get a lot of questions about. Well, isn't coffee bad for your bones? Doesn't it increase your risk of osteoporosis? The research here is mixed. So caffeine can cause the excretion of calcium in the urine. So it ups how much calcium basically we're peeing out, but it still usually stays within the normal range. In some studies, a high caffeine intake is associated with a decreased bone mineral density and an increased fracture risk. So that is definitely something to be aware of if you are on the cusp and bone density is an issue for you. Other research, however, shows that caffeine isn't associated with a change or a decrease in bone mineral density. So again, one of those things that would be very individual. If bone density, if osteopenia or osteoporosis is something that you have that's a concern, definitely talk with your doctor about that. And if you are a big coffee drinker and you're a big coffee drinker, it might be worth dialing it back and just kind of making sure you're keeping that intake moderate. Even in people who are healthy, we know that too much caffeine can cause, insomnia, makes it hard for us to fall asleep, stay asleep, nervousness, restlessness, stomach upset, nausea, high heart rate, rapid breathing rate. We get shaky. There's so much anxiety, agitation, people get ringing in the ears. There's a lot that can happen when we do have too much caffeine. And if anyone's had it, you know it, like you felt it. Some people are really sensitive to this. I had a guy I worked with who, he couldn't even have, actually, we know several people who are like this. They can't even have chocolate because the amount of caffeine in the chocolate, which is really small, will cause the symptoms that we just talked about. So again, everyone is different in what your tolerance is here. So I think it's just really important to kind of tune in. And if you are feeling these things on a regular basis, do a self experiment, dial back your caffeine and see, is it helping, to improve those symptoms. And knowing, of course, that if we go cold turkey on caffeine, we might have some of these physical withdrawal symptoms, a headache, kind of that fogginess, low energy, might be hard to concentrate. So being aware of that. And so for a lot of people, kind of making that gradual cutback can be better so that we don't have what would be considered those like unpleasant symptoms. So how much is too much? What is, that answer is going to vary a lot by person. But when we look at the population as a whole, most major health organizations define moderate intake as not more than 200 or 300 milligrams a day. So that's, again, the equivalent of 2 normal brewed cups of coffee to 3 normal brewed cups of coffee. Tea, like a green tea, ranges from 30 to 50 grams of 30 to 50 milligrams of caffeine. Decaf tea, decaf coffee has about 2. So still just like the tiniest little bit in there. A shot of espresso is about 64. So if you have a double shot, you're going to have somewhere, between 120, 140 milligrams of caffeine. So not crazy if it's in that double shot of espresso. If you're doing something, you're a Diet Coke drinker, a 12 ounce, just a little can, is about 46. So a Starbucks coffee, like a Starbucks Grande coffee, is going to be over 300 milligrams of caffeine. So being aware of that, that's also the size. That's 16 ounces and it's strong coffee. So that 16 ounce Starbucks brewed coffee over 300. Some stimulants, like if you take something like a No-Dose or Vivarin, which I don't ever recommend, but those are like 200. And there's also some energy drinks that will have easily 200 plus. A lot of energy drinks like Red Bull has just about 80 milligrams of caffeine in a little can, but others can have 200 and up. So just being mindful and looking at labels to see what all am I taking in, whether it's drinks, coffee, tea, energy drinks. I'm not a big fan of energy drinks, by the way, because they're either high sugar or most of them are artificially sweetened. There are a few that are natural energy drinks. There's one called, there's several different ones. Most of the ones that I find that are actually like at Whole Foods type places, they do use natural caffeine, like it'll be green tea extracts, and they are sweetened with things like monk fruit or stevia. And so they are kind of a much more natural version of an energy drink. Of course, the price point and the convenience of being able to find them varies. But for the most part, the way I look at energy drinks is kind of the way I look at if you're just reaching for that caffeine and you feel like throughout the day, you wish you could give yourself that IV of caffeine and just keep it coming. There's probably other things that we're doing when it comes to diet or sleep or other habits in our day that are really behind it. Because if we feel like we need that much of that constant infusion of caffeine into our day, what else is really underlying that? So I first would want to look at what can we do to improve quality of sleep, improve the length of sleep. What are we eating earlier in the day that might be dropping us down? Are we not drinking enough fluids that are leaving us dehydrated? They're leaving us feeling fatigued, and therefore we're reaching for that caffeine for a pick-me-up. So I feel like when we're reaching for any of these things that are artificially caffeinated and we're looking for them specifically to give us that buzz of energy, and especially if we're looking at it beyond just kind of the normal morning ritual, cup of tea or cup of coffee, and we're looking at like through the day, we're looking for what's our supplier, what's our source going to be. And I would really encourage you to look and see why, like what else is happening in your day that you are craving these. What I found personally, I mentioned it at the start of this podcast, that I had really dialed back my caffeine intake without even really trying. And I think there was a couple of things at play. I feel like once I cut back on the caffeine, I felt like I felt less of a sense of urgency and like a pressure to like do, And so instead of thinking that like I have all of this to do and I have to just like power through it and get all of these things accomplished, I think I've just kind of over the past couple of years said, like, I'm going to do the things that I can do, and I'm going to do them as best I can. And there's going to be some things that are going to be unfinished, or I'm going to have to push them to the next day or the next week. And I'm going to be okay with that. And as I kind of shifted that mindset and had a little bit, or I would say a lot less pressure that I was putting on myself, I didn't feel the need to have that iced coffee or that extra caffeine to give me that jolt of the push through. Personally, I feel a lot better. I feel a lot less like just that there's like for me, it was like a focus, but it came through as like an energy that felt very like, and you see it, like if you have someone that's like over caffeinated, they're just kind of like, they're hopped up, they're pushing, like, okay, I'm ready. Let's jump on it. Let's do it. Let's knock it out. Whereas I felt like dialing that caffeine back, I felt a little bit more just chill about things. Still, I think a lot of the people around me would say she could probably cut back more because I was like, go, go, go. We've got all these things to do. We have our list. We've got these things. And there's so much that between me and my team that we're always doing, we're always pushing forward. But I feel like it's all without quite that sense of urgency and quite that sense of like intensity in a really good way. Yet still accomplishing things and still having all these things happen, and we're putting that work and we're putting that effort, but dialing back that caffeine, I feel like was a good thing for me and also probably for the people around me. So I would just encourage you, if you're listening to this and you're one of these caffeine, how can you get your fix, and where's your supplier through the day, and how could you maybe hook yourself to an IV for it? I would reconsider or look at kind of these other things in your day. So anyway, back to what our upper limit looks like. I would say that the upper limit for most organizations are saying, 200 to 300 milligrams a day, which is, I kind of rattled off some of those caffeine contents, but if it's tea is about 50 milligrams per cup at the most, 35, 50. Coffee is about 100. If we were doing like that Starbucks Grande 16 ounces, well, that's 330 right there, over 300. But the USDA dietary guidelines, their advisory committee gives the upper limit of 400 milligrams a day. And again, that translates to the equivalent of about 4 normal brewed cups of coffee, which still feels like a lot of caffeine for a lot of people. I kind of look at, personally, I like to go with the 200 to 300 a day. I feel like if we've got sleep in check, our diet in check, we're trying to keep our stress levels in check, 200 to 300 milligrams of caffeine can really be a good fit for most of us. I feel like once we start to get to 400, we're really starting to creep up there. So while 400 is considered the upper limit, I would say keeping it under that, closer to 200 to 300 is probably better for our sleep, our other, just psychological health, our stress levels, all of that. The other thing to keep in mind as you're kind of looking at where am I getting my caffeine, and you're looking at labels, only added caffeine has to be stated on product labels. And so if they're adding caffeine, they've got to list it, but if not, it's optional. So sometimes you'll see caffeine listed on, the tea or something like that, but it can make it hard to know exactly how much you're getting. So again, that's kind of the deal on most of us, just the normal average healthy person, 400 max upper limit. Most major medical organizations say moderate would be 200 to 300. I would agree with that. I would aim for the 200. If you had the extra cup in there, then okay, you're still well within that upper limit. One thing I would also say, kind of going back to that, the heavy caffeine users. If you are one of those people and you're listening to this and you're like, Molly, I got it though. I can drink coffee all day long. It doesn't affect me. I would really encourage you to look at like, what's your reactions to things? Are things that maybe aren't that stressful or something isn't that negative, but how are we responding to it? Do we snap back quickly? Do we react before thinking through? All of these things, just you may feel like you're a person who can drink coffee all day long and it doesn't affect you, but does it really not affect you? How are you reacting and handling other types of situations in your day? You may feel like you sleep great and your heart rate's not anything out of whack, but maybe how are you handling some of those other situations? A couple of things to note also about upper limit is pregnancy and kids. So Pregnant women, according to the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, says that expecting women can safely have up to 200 milligrams of caffeine daily, which is about 2 cups of coffee. So 200 would be the upper limit there. Personally, I would say I would definitely keep that as the max and trying to really minimize how much you're putting in so that, throughout the course of the pregnancy, we're not having this constant infusion of a stimulant. That's my own personal recommendation is if it's me personally, I would want to really minimize these external stimulants that I would be putting in, and that would include coffee. So, if 200 is the upper limit, maybe if you've got your 1 cup of coffee that keeps you happy, that's 100 milligrams a day. Or even if you can go halvesies on that, that would be a half strength cup of coffee. Kids, it's interesting. So kids over the age of 12. So kids, youth from the ages of about 12 to 18. The American College of Pediatrics says if they're 12 to 18 years old, not to exceed more than 85 to 100 milligrams a day. So again, that 1 cup of normal coffee is 100. That Starbucks Grande is 330. That Red Bull energy drink is 80. So kids ages 12 to 18, not to exceed the upper limit of about 85 to 100 milligrams of caffeine. Kids under the age of 12, the American College of Pediatrics recommends that caffeine is avoided altogether, like as close to 0 as possible. So that's definitely just, some things to keep in mind on upper limit. A few things that I think is interesting is the rate of caffeine metabolism slows as we get older. So the rate of caffeine metabolism slows with aging. This means that when it's metabolized at a slower rate, that means that we process it slower and that caffeine can have longer lasting stimulant effects. So as someone gets older, what used to be a fine amount of coffee for them to have, maybe they need to dial it back because it's processed slowly. So you're not clearing it as quickly. People who smoke, it's the opposite. If you smoke, which hopefully you don't, if you smoke, how you metabolize caffeine is the least of my concerns. I would much prefer you to focus on stopping smoking. But in smokers, caffeine is metabolized at a faster rate, meaning that caffeine is actually cleared from the body much more quickly. And so they don't have, I guess you would just say, like, to put it in a very easy to understand terms, they don't have that buzz, that caffeine buzz doesn't last for long. Whereas if you're a slow metabolizer of caffeine, you're going to feel the effects for a longer period of time. So with women, we actually metabolize caffeine at different rates depending on the phase of the menstrual cycle. Also, oral contraceptives, birth control pills slow the metabolism of the caffeine, again, meaning that it can have those longer lasting effects. So all of that, I think, is just an interesting thing to think about how we all process and handle caffeine differently. So if you're like, okay, maybe I do need to curb my caffeine just a little bit, there's a few things that can make that transition easier. So start by tracking how much caffeine you're actually getting, because we can kind of fake ourselves out, or we can think I don't have that much. But when we actually start thinking through all these parts in our day of where we are having caffeine, so start by tracking what you're actually getting on a regular basis. Remember to look at some of those medications if you're taking them regularly. Some of those pain relievers we talked about can have it. Look at everything that you're taking in that could potentially give you caffeine. Cut back gradually. I would say aiming to drop about 50 milligrams, which would be the equivalent of half of a cup of coffee every few days. It could be every 5 to 7 days even. You're just kind of gradually cutting that back until you achieve what you would consider your goal of moderate caffeine consumption. So if you are one that's maxing out that upper limit of 400 milligrams of caffeine a day with 4 cups of coffee, and you thought, I might want to kind of bring that back, then gradually cut back by a half cup, or again, do half strength in some of them so that you're gradually cutting back. And again, do it slowly. There's, for most people, it's not a race. There's no rush to do it. So do it in a way that's comfortable to you and you don't feel like you're making a huge sacrifice. So if it's every 5 to 7 days, maybe every weekend, you kind of make that adjustment and that's your new game plan going forward for that week, but doing it slowly until you reach that goal of moderate. And again, if you find it difficult because you just really like the flavor of what you're drinking, go half and half so that you're incorporating the decaf coffee or decaf tea along with the fully loaded versions. You can also do decaf herbal tea. So I mentioned earlier that herbal tea we don't get the health benefits from it like we do from the true green or black or white tea. But herbal tea is completely hydrating. It has 0 caffeine. So going halvesies with that herbal tea and your regular tea can be good also. And then turn to other things that really help to naturally boost your energy. So that short, brisk walk, it doesn't have to be long. Even 5 minutes, 10 minutes can really boost our alertness. And so doing that either first thing in the morning, doing it in the afternoon when you're kind of find yourself reaching for that extra dose of caffeine, getting a little bit of movement in there can be great. If you're inside in an office building and let's say it's raining or you don't have the option to go outside for a walk, even if there's like stairs and you did, a few up and down the stairs, 5 minutes, just get your heart rate going. If you have an office where the door shuts, do something in your office, do squat jumps in there, do burpees, do jumping jacks. If you know your coworkers well and you don't have an office, you could probably still do it out with them. But getting that movement and getting that blood flow to the muscles, to the brain is going to be a huge alertness booster that we don't have to turn to that external source of caffeine. And of course, making sure you're eating frequently through the day, you're not eating high sugar foods that are going to leave you feeling bottomed out. So you're having protein-rich foods, plant-based fats with these. You're avoiding these white processed carbs that are going to leave us bottomed out, wanting that pick-me-up of energy. And then finally, making sure you're hydrated is going to be another nutritional key. So take your body weight, divide it by 2. That's how many ounces of fluid we need. If we're dehydrated, we're going to feel tired and we often can reach for that caffeine for that pick-me-up. So those are some easy things. Get moving, get that blood flow, that oxygen flow to your brain. Get moving, eat frequently, make sure you're not having a lot of sugar, make sure you're having that protein and fat whenever you do eat, making sure you're well hydrated, and then finally, doing your best to get a good night's sleep. So all of these can be ways that we can help to get our caffeine intake in check and still enjoy that delicious cup of coffee, of tea, whatever it is that just truly brings us happiness, so that we find that we are sipping these things to enjoy them for what they are, the flavors of them, the ritual that they bring to us in our day, without feeling like we're turning to them just for the purpose of revving us up. So let me know what you think. Has this helped give you a better grasp on caffeine, on your caffeine intake, kind of helping to explore why and how you are turning to coffee, tea, whatever it might be for this pick-me-up, and understanding some of these benefits of it. So there's a lot of benefits of caffeine. We talked a lot about these health benefits, so no need to cut it out, but just making sure that we're in control of it, that our caffeine is not controlling us. As you incorporate some of these strategies into your own life, let me know about it. Let me hear about it. I love hearing feedback from you guys. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. And if you would like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.